All right, good evening, everyone. I am Ignatius Jean, your host of our CAWASA Wednesday webinars. And today we are going to have a presentation on effective utility management. And this is going to be presented by Ms. Valerie Jenkinson, the president of the Operators Without Borders of British Columbia, Canada. And Valerie has a very long-standing relationship with us in the Caribbean, having collaborated with CAWASA even before my time, and with as many other utilities directly, from as far north as the Bahamas and all the way down to Trinidad. So,
and Guyana and Belize.
And Guyana and Belize. And she has been very instrumental in facilitating the tutorials that we had on the water distribution and water treatment at the start of the year. And we are now preparing for another series that will be looking at wastewater. And she has kindly consented to be our presenter today on effective utility management. It's a very involved subject, but I guess it will give you an insight into management, and maybe for your future career and your personal development, you may find opportunities therein to continue. So the floor is yours, Valerie.
Thanks, Ignatius, and it's always great to be. What he didn't tell you is he didn't have anybody today. That's why. So I said, well, I could do something because I've got the slide deck and I've done this presentation before. So I may be second choice, but I hope I'll be first in your hearts. And it's now been a year and 3 months since I was home in St. Lucia. I'm still locked down in Canada, and we are in a lockdown. We're hoping that after we have a long weekend, a holiday weekend this weekend, and we're hoping that the lockdown will end, not end completely, but will lessen the restrictions after this weekend. But I hope all of you are safe and that you've all been well. And it's lovely to see so many names, because when I have one of our Operators Without Borders presenters, I always used to, sit in as much as I can, and I see the same names coming. So I think this is the regular cohort. As Shakespeare's Henry V said, we few, we happy few. So it's really great to be with you. So I'm just going to share my screen. And if you have questions as you go along, unmute yourself, and I don't mind you interrupting. I don't see it as an interruption, I see it as going to be something good. So I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. And you can put your, just unmute yourself or put a question in the chat box, and Ignatius will take a look at the chat and let me know if there's anything as we go along. So the subject today is effective utility management, or as we call it, EUM. And EUM is been around now for about, since about 2008. And I'm going to talk to you about the beginning and how this all started. I'll talk to you about what it is and what it does. And then at the end, I'll talk to you about this effective utility management program, the certificate program that we run. So let me just see if I can, got something that's holding my screen up there, and I'm just going to put that to the bottom. I'm not sure how to quite get rid of it, but just 1 second. There we go. So basically, in the water and wastewater industry, you would be aware of these challenges. AWWA does a survey every year from about 60,000 members that they have. And they look at what are the challenges, the biggest challenges that they have in the industry. And I'm sure that many of you can relate to these. Aging infrastructure is one. Of course, it brings in a lot of non-revenue water. And don't tell me there's anybody in the Caribbean that isn't very, very familiar with the problems with non-revenue water and aging infrastructure. Costs are rising, and we all know that we have many of our governments are not very open to raising the rates and tariffs. And so many of you are faced with rising costs, but not getting more money from your rates and tariffs. increasingly stringent regulatory requirements, perhaps not as regulatory requirements as we have in Canada, but they are getting tougher and tougher. And every time we bring in new and more stringent regulations, that increases the cost of running the utility. Populations are changing. And the other thing is we have a rapidly changing workforce. Again, not quite as bad in the Caribbean as it is in North America, where sometimes 50% of the management team is going to be leaving within the next 5 years as they get older, because we do have an aging population in our industry, and we're not very often the choice career for people. You know, how many people when they're in high school say, I really want to go and work in the sewers? Not many people. Where it's a fascinating industry, and we need to do better at promoting that. So all of those things told, we have a rapidly changing workforce, which means that we have a challenge with training our people and keeping them up to date with the latest technologies and the latest practices. So the EUM basically took a look at new beginnings and said we need a new focus. There needs to be a process that which utilities can follow. We need measurable deliveries. We need commitment. And this isn't one of AWWA and WEF's ones, but I say we need passion. And I think that there is so much passion in the water industry. When I started Operators Without Borders in 2017, I was absolutely blown away by the people who came forward to volunteer and bring their passion for the industry to help others. So on all of these things, the effective utility management delivers. So we're going to talk first about people development and selection in water utilities and aligning this with EUM. We've been working with a consultant in Canada, and when we do our leadership team, we bring this portion of the work that he does in. And when we were working, for instance, with WASCO, we went through this process with WASCO with all their managers, and it was just absolutely eye-opening. In fact, I remember one person came to me after they'd been through this process and said, it must be magic because he knows so much about me. And another person said, I got my test results back on my profile, and it was not accurate at all. And he said, but I took it home and my wife read and said, they've absolutely nailed you. It's perfect. So sometimes we don't always see that. So all jobs require the right talent for maximum performance. And if people don't have that skills and capacity, and also the passion for what they're doing, we're not going to get a maximum performance. If somebody comes into work every day and hates what they're doing, they're not the right person for that job because they're never going to give that 100% that we need. So let's take a look at some research that was done by different organizations on the return on investment when we do training. So they did a number of companies and they looked at the return on investment. So when you looked at basic skills training, so your technical training so that you know how to go out there and just do the basic skills that you have to do every day to keep the systems running. They looked and tested at 840 people, and the business measure was cost reduction. So by training people, not having them make as many mistakes as having them to be more productive, that reduced their costs. And the return on investment was 695%. So for every dollar spent in training, they estimate the return on investment at 695%. On technical skills, so we do a lot of technical training, Ignatius, related to the water and wastewater training that we're doing for exam preparation. Those are technical skills. They looked at 278 people. They looked at increased productivity. So they measured the productivity and found a return on investment of 121%. So in safety training, which is something that is, I think, desperately needed in the Caribbean, from what I've seen in many, many places, interviewed or tested 400 people. And what they looked at is reduced insurance premiums and increased safety, the lessening of accidents. Estimated return on investments of safety training, 1,277%. That was the biggest one of all. And our safety training is absolutely mandated in Canada. you have to go through confined space training every couple of years. All of these training on safety is mandated. It is law. And you may not be an operator if you're not fulfilling your safety training. On the management, they didn't look at as many people, but again, they looked at increased productivity if you develop your management, and the return on investment was 285%. Now, one of the things that I have seen, and I've been working in capacity building and training, I did own the largest training company in Canada for water and wastewater industry. And why we globbed onto the EUM and started doing this is because there was lots of safety training. There was loads of technical training. There was lots of business training for utilities, or sorry, not business training, but basic training for utilities. There was almost no proper management developing programs and training for the water and wastewater utility managers. And this is why EUM has become so important. So again, different studies, a UK study, a 5% increase in workers trained resulted in a 4% gain in productivity and a 1.6% gain in wages. Australian case study, an increase in all cases ranging from 30% in fuel efficiency to the safety training we talked about, 1,277%. A different study, an Irish case study, showed 32% return on investment in supervisory and management skills, plus an 800 plus return on investment. So this is to say, people don't train enough because they think training is expensive. It takes time, it takes money to train. But when you look at the return on investment, why are we not training more? So one of the terms we talk always is, if the job would talk, what would it say? And so we worked with this psychologist and took a look at identifying the talent that is needed to do the job of a wastewater or water manager or operator. And so there was knowledge. We had to have the knowledge. We had to have the hard skills, the actual technical training to do that job. But we also looked at the behaviors, the rewards and the culture of the organization, and personal skills. And when I'm talking about personal skills, we talk a lot now about measuring in, emotional intelligence. So how do we behave towards the people we work with? Is it a toxic workplace? Is everybody pulling together? Do we have a team? Are we getting the most out of that workplace? So these are all things that we identified as being necessary. And this is a very interesting one. When you make a mistake in hiring, the cost is estimated at 3 times that person's salary, because there is an enormous cost to hiring somebody, to training them, to getting them up to speed. And if they don't work out, you start all over again. And sometimes that person has done a lot of damage to your organization. So it's very expensive just from a dollar's point of view. But there's a cost of the risk if something goes wrong. If people make mistakes in hiring, if they hire somebody who really doesn't care, and there are, unfortunately, we have the most wonderful people in this industry, that in any industry I've ever worked in. As I'm getting older, I've worked in a lot of industries. The people in the water and wastewater, I think, are the best. But there's always some bad apples. And they're the people, I remember one person saying, I didn't want to get this job to work, I wanted a salary. So that's not the best attitude to bring to the workplace. And if you've got that attitude, there is a real risk of something going wrong and it being expensive. So there's a cost of lost knowledge as somebody leaves, the skills, the contacts, and loss of departmental productivity. It's disruptive to the whole team. So what we looked at was the competencies, and we took these with a starting point of EUM, but then we expanded them. And we did this by sitting down with water and wastewater utility managers, foremen, supervisors. And again, if the job could talk, what would it say? What are the competencies, not in general industry, but customized to our industry? What are they that we need? And I'm not going to read through them all, but I'll just give you just a moment to read through these. Because as you see, it's not just technical skills. There's so much more than just technical skills. Because what I always say is, if you don't have the technical skills, you're probably not even going to get looked at. But we often hire on technical skills, but we fire people or have a problem with people because of the skills in this area that we're looking at right now. So it's a supplement to our technical selection. Then the human side is that critical component. It's the things that we should be looking at. And very often we hire people in or promote people into management positions who we like, we get on well with, they don't challenge us. And they're very often very similar to ourselves. And that's not really building a great team. And one of the things I know in my career and where I've been hiring a lot of people, I try and hire people who are quite different from myself, because I have a lot of skills that I don't have, and I know some of the skills I don't have. So I need to supplement and make sure that the people I'm hiring bring to the table not the same skills that I have that make me like them, but the skills that I'm missing that are going to round out our team. So self-management, personal accountability, planning and organization, decision-making. If people haven't got those skills in a managerial role, we have a problem. So we looked at developing these competencies related to the job, and then we tied them to the EUM 10 attributes, which I'm going to talk about a lot more as we go through this presentation. And we want to make sure that everything is definable and measurable. Has anybody got an example that they would like to share about a time when there was a bad hiring decision made in the utility, and did it cost you anything? Does anybody have a story that they can share? If so, just unmute yourself. Well, maybe you've done a much better job at it than I have, because I've made some bad errors in my time that...
Hi, Valerie, Nicole here.
Hi, Nicole.
Right. What came to mind when you asked about an example is that because we are government run, we usually get persons sometime due to constituency office or, you know, I don't want to say around election time, but we get persons bring on, and, you know, that effort and passion that you spoke about earlier, you know, they sometimes come on with the attitude of, well, the minister sent me, or the so-and-so sent me, or so what are you gonna do, you know? And so, yeah, that's my example.
Yeah, and I've seen that in many places in the Caribbean. And one of the things I say is we've got to push back against that. The human resources department and the general managers have to push back against that. And sometimes I've seen it where there is, you know, there's just so much politics involved in it, but it is so detrimental to the utility. There's certain utilities where they've got probably twice as many people as they actually need, because they've been the dumping ground of relatives and friends that need a job of the politicians. So that is a conversation that needs to be had with the board of directors of the utility, because we do need to push back. We need good people. One of the things that I always say to people, and some of you may have heard me say to this, in a society, who has the greatest influence on public health? Is it a doctor? Is it a nurse? I say it's the water and wastewater people running our treatment facilities, because a doctor may inadvertently, if he's unlucky, kill somebody, one of his patients, gives them the wrong medicine, operates incorrectly. But that doesn't happen a lot, I hope. But if you take a look at what can happen in our water and wastewater utilities, we had a case in a place called Walkerton. Two brothers who weren't well enough trained, and they saw a sample that showed it was the E. coli, but they thought they knew their systems really well. So they just fudged the results. They changed the results. And then they lied about it afterwards. 11 people died. We'd look at Flint, Michigan. So if you read the report on Flint, Michigan, as to what happened there, they said that it was a great deal to do with a lack of training. So if you don't have people who have the ability to be trained in the first place, or who have no interest in the fact that they have a job and all they want to do is pick up that paycheck every 2 weeks, we're going to have problems. So I think we must step up to our responsibilities as senior managers and push back against this. Is that easy to do? No, because you know, we're always fearful of our own jobs. But quite honestly, if that is where the buck stops. This is on your shoulders. I don't know if that comments on. Anybody else got an example before we move on? Okay. And for some reason, oh, there we go. So this is what, when we worked with the senior utilities, and I know that you might have to lean into your screen to see this, but these are all the competencies that we came up with as to what is necessary. And it's all tied in with across the top, which is the effective utility management attributes, which we're going to go over in some detail. And so we looked at these. So there's a lot of work that our company put into sort of hiring right and making sure we knew what the competencies were and how capable our management team was, not to punish, but to support. Because if you're very bad at self-management and personal accountability, and you're having a management position, and we've put you in that position, we have a responsibility to help you get better. And so we need to know where you sit on that spectrum so that we can design training programs that are going to help you develop and grow as a manager. It's interesting, sometimes you can see productivity levels, and I've seen curves where they've gone up and down. And sometimes I've seen a big drop and then a big rise. And what it was a change of manager and the attitude of that manager and the skills that they brought to the table with their team. And I'm not a big fan of the Donald Trump type management or the Steve Jobs type of management where you yell at everybody. That is very, very old fashioned. It can work, and sometimes if you own the company and everything, but generally speaking, if you take a look at all the business gurus and the management superstars like Jack Walsh and those people, they'll say you have to build a team and you have to treat people with dignity and respect. And I'm very, very much on that. I believe that if you treat people well and you build your team, you can fly to the moon and people will respond well. So when we use this when this method has been used, it increases the chances of hiring successfully from 14%, pretty low figure, to 82% success rate. So that is an enormously big figure. So now we're going to talk about the EUM and then about the management training. So let's talk about first where effective utility management came from. This started back in about 2008. In the United States, the American Water Works Association, WEF, two of the largest regulatory bodies in the world, got together with a whole bunch of other organizations, the US Public Works Association, the Environmental Protection Agency, etc. It was the very first time that all of them had collaborated, because they said, the water and wastewater industry is changing. It's not just a question of digging ditches and putting a pipe in and using a screen on a wastewater treatment. We now have much more sophisticated treatment. We have much more sophisticated systems. So if all we're hiring is somebody who is not literate and can only dig a ditch, how are we going to run these more complicated systems? So they came together and they developed this EUM primer, of which all of you should have had a copy. If you haven't, let Ignatius know and he will get it over to you, because we are going to take a look at that in a while. And they looked at everything from a holistic point of view. Very often, this management is focused on the operational and financial. And they said, no, it's a lot more than that. we are now running businesses. We have to be aware of what the skills are that we need. And so they issued this primer that identified 10 attributes of EUM and their components. And we're going to talk about the self-test for utilities to identify gaps in the performance. So why did they do this? It's designed to help you run your systems better. It's to increase the productivity and increase the effectiveness of the performance of the utility. It's accepted as an international utility management tool and a starting point for many, many utilities. I was working over in South Africa, and I was talking to the huge water utility over there. And I was absolutely surprised. They needed a lot of help on many things, but they were very, very familiar with EUM and were working towards EUM in their system. So well known all over the world now. And what it can do is it can say to you, you've got the technical skills. Most water utilities are not short on technical skills, but what about the skills about running the business, running this in today's age? So this is an effective way of starting that. One of the things that, and tell me if this isn't true, if anybody thinks that this isn't true, raise your hand and let us see. But for most utility managers, whether it's in Canada or the Caribbean, you're going from one urgent priority to the next. It's almost, it seems impossible sometimes to sit down and think, because it's like the water breaks, the bursts. You get one fixed and then there's another one over here, and then tomorrow there's another one over here. And that's what our base tends to be like. I've worked with a lot of general managers, and so often they're on the phone all day dealing with crises or at least problems. So other utility managers are applying this systematic, effective utility management approach. And once they've done this, it's helped them improve their products and services. It increases the community support that you have. And if you have community support, you're more likely to get acceptable rates and tariffs when you need to have an increase. And it ensures the strong and viable utility long into the future. What it does is build sustainability. And I remember I was teaching a whole bunch of people in the EUM program, and one of them had been through several of the modules, and he came to me and he said, you know, I used to be one of these people. I never had time. He said, I was working late every single night of the week. I thought I was doing a really good job, but I was stressed. I was not sometimes feeling well because I had so much work and so many problems. And I just went from one crisis to another. So he said, I have taken this effective utility management, the programs that we've been running, he said, and I've just changed it, the way I do it. He said, and my relationship with my clients, and they were a non-profit, but they had to make a profit, which sounds like a dichotomy, but it's a little bit like where you're at as well. They're supposed to make a profit or at least break even. But he now was going and meeting with his clients, taking the learnings that he had from EUM, and it absolutely not only transformed his utility, but it transformed his life as well. He said, I can take my weekends off now. I don't have to work as hard because I have a good, strong system. So it should enhance your stewardship of your infrastructure. So we're going to go through these and you'll see how infrastructure fits in with this. It will improve your performance in the critical areas of running your utility, and it responds to not just the current, but also future challenges. Because as a senior manager, we can't just be looking at today. We have to be looking into the future. The technologies will be changing. The way we run the utilities will change again. I did have a presentation and I showed a utility with one of the old treatment centers. And, you know, it was a hut with some bits and pieces here, a bit of rusting equipment over here. And then the next picture I showed was a new treatment facility in New York. And honest to God, it looked like a spaceship. It was so modern. And how can you be running a place like that if you're still, you know, your people are still in the shed? So there are 10 attributes of effective management and water utilities. So we're going to look at those. We're going to look at the key to management success and how you can begin. So in the chat, I'm going to open the chat out, and what I'd like you to do is just write down what are some of the attributes. I'm going to give you one so you have a starting point. Financial viability. That's one of the attributes. So in the chat, let's just take a couple of minutes, write down a few of the things that you think might be an attribute. So don't be shy. So I'm not seeing anything. Oh, good, Ezekiel. Knowledge. Yeah. If you can try and be good, Anderson, strategic planning is going to come into this. Think about what you have to do every day as a manager. What other things you do and are responsible for? Process safety, yeah. Think about some of the people you have to deal with. And what about equipment? How would that come into this? Time management, yeah. Structural integrity, yes. So your infrastructure. Employee training, good, Calvin, good. You see, if I give you time, you can come up with some of these. Resource management, yeah. And both plant and personnel, I'm going to go beyond that, because what about the water resource management? That's also important, isn't it? Preventative maintenance. Oh, I love that one. So that's going to come under something we call operational optimization. Efficiency, productivity. Great. Okay. Thank you. So what I want you to do now is I want you to take out the self-assessment tool in your Appendix B primer. And I want you to go through this exercise. So I'm just going to bring that up on the screen. So I've got to stop sharing for a moment. Where is my stop share? And then okay, so share screen. Okay, so it's Appendix B that you're looking for. Does everybody have that? And it's on page 30 of the primer. And what we want to look at is this. I'm just going to this graph here. So actually, I'm going to wait a bit. Let me go back in, because I think we need to do a little bit more, because when I think about it. So bear with me. So I'm going to do that a little bit later to give you more of a chance of getting some of it more. Every time I stop sharing, it stops going like that. So here are the 10 attributes. This is something you need to know. So you were talking about things like risk management. So that is the operational resiliency piece. But look at the other one. So product quality. Isn't this what we really need to get out to our public? The product quality. Customer satisfaction is one. So I said, look at who you deal with. Employee leadership and development. That's somebody said training. So that was great. Somebody talked about productivity. That's your operational optimization. How do you get the most out of your workplace? Financial viability, we talked about. Infrastructure stability. So that is your asset management. Now in Canada, asset management plan is mandatory. Everybody has to have one by law. So it's something that's very near and dear to our heart, and there's lots of information on that. Again, Operation Resilience, that's a lot to do with your risk assessment and your hazard assessments. Community sustainability. What would that be? That is where you take a look is, in my community, what is this going to do? And I'm going to give you some competencies in a little while as well. Water resource adequacy we talked about. And then it's interesting because when I ask people, what do you think is the most important? Very often financial viability comes up. We've got to be financially viable. Product quality comes up. One of the things that I think is most important is stakeholder understanding and support. And people look at me and say, well, is that as important as product quality or financial viability? But again, unless you have stakeholder understanding and support, and that's the general public, your board of directors, your government, the politicians, unless they understand your operation and what you need and how important it is, they're not going to give you the financial viability. And if you don't have the financial viability, you're possibly not going to have the product quality either. So the thing is with these, they're all absolutely interrelated. And when we go through the training on these ones, we don't have 10 courses that says customer satisfaction. That comes into all of the other things, because you have to consider so many of these things holistically and together. So in infrastructure and maintenance, we need an asset inventory and management. We need a condition assessment of assessment of the assets. We need a predictive and preventative maintenance program. And wow, so many people do not have this. We run from crisis to crisis. We talked about the burst over here and a burst over here, here a burst, there a burst, everywhere a burst. We need a preventative maintenance program, and that has to be budgeted, and there has to be standard operating procedures and checklists. And this is something you're going to be hearing a lot of in the next while, because we are working with Ignatius to bring everybody a free set of standard operating procedures and checklists, because if you don't have them, or you're missing some in the ones you have, you need those. It's one of the things that I believe you run a utility on by having that. So we need the value of a maintenance program versus capital replacement. I've been in places where I look at a piece of equipment that has to be replaced, and it shouldn't have to be. It's not old in years or number of hours of operation. It's old because nobody has maintained it. That is not sustainability. That is lack of bad management. So we need the standard operating procedures. And then, of course, we need to take a look at how our funding is, our budgeting, our rates and tariffs. And again, that comes into our stakeholders' understanding and support. Make sense? So we bring all those things together. And the way we have it is right in the middle is these 10 attributes. And coming into those, you have your soft skills competencies. So those are the type of things we were talking about earlier. The team building, the leadership skills, the self-motivation, and those also come into the behaviors and the motivators. We also need our technical skills, so our technical competencies, and we need to hire correctly. We need to onboard people correctly and have an onboarding program that teaches them. And then we need to make sure we retain our talent so that we're not losing people because it's a, if you excuse the pun, a shitty environment. So that is, but it all comes into working with these 10 attributes. So in the following slides, we're going to identify each attribute and the component of each, because it's really important that we understand, well, what does it mean by operational optimization? So we're going to go through that. So in product quality, you've got to produce good quality water, preferably 24/7. I know that's a big ask in some places, but that's where we need to be aiming for. And we need good treated effluent. We need to have standards that we go towards. We need to look at the process residuals, and we need to be in full compliance with regulatory needs. And one of the things is we need to have good regulations. And very often, even where we have them, they're not being enforced. So that's another part of this puzzle. And the product quality has got to be consistent with customer, public health, and ecological needs as well. As you know, when I was working with Crew 1, only 3% of wastewater in the Caribbean was treated, and it's killing the coral, it's killing fish. Mind you, the lobsters and the crab in certain areas really like it and thrive on it, but generally speaking, this is not good for the environment, either customers, public health, or environment. Financial viability, I think most of us understand where we need that, but we need to make a commitment to understand and identify the condition of its assets and the cost to properly maintain that. That is part of financial viability. We need to understand the risk and cost of failure. If something breaks down because we haven't maintained it, there's going to be a big price to pay. I was working with a Canadian utility, and there was a small leak that people walked by and didn't fix. It was in one of their buildings. It would have probably, taken 2 hours to fix it. Would have cost next to, well, really nothing, just somebody fixing it. But they left it and they left it and they left it to the point where it undermined the building itself, and the cost was about $200,000 Canadian. So we need to ensure asset repair and replacement efforts are properly conditioned to minimize overall cost and disruption. Again, if we're not maintaining products, we have to go out and often buy a new one where we should have still been running the old one. Operation resiliency, a culture. So this is where this culture comes in, to ensure leadership and staff work together to anticipate and avoid problems. A manager is not there on his own. How many of you have good tailgate meetings at least once a week, where you're not telling your staff everything, you're asking them, what is it that we need to be looking at? Have you seen anything this week that we need to be addressing? So involving the staff. And let me tell you, when you start involving your employees, very often you will find as a manager, they are suspicious. They don't trust you necessarily. What are they getting at? They want something. You have to stick with this and show them that you care and that you really want their opinions. And that can take time because, as I say, they're suspicious. So in the resiliency, the utility properly assesses risk and establishes tolerance levels. So what we look at there is a risk register. So all of these come into the courses and we teach all of this. We have to look at what the risks are. And the risks are not just about equipment failure. They're legal, regulatory, financial, environmental, safety, security, natural disasters. So we have to look at all of these on our risk register, and we're going to have to, as a team, determine how much risk we are prepared to go to, because we cannot eliminate 100% of risk. I mean, that's just not going to be feasible, but we have to have mitigations and adaptations to these risks. So in community scalability, what does that mean? The utility maintains operations, infrastructure, and investments to protect, restore, and enhance the natural environment. So how do we make our community a better place to live by what we in the water and wastewater industry do? We strive to use water and energy resources efficiently. We look at conservation. We promote an economic viability and community improvement. There was one utility I was working with where they had a whole new industry coming into town. The community had got big. It was going to create a number of jobs, and they had worked with the planning department, and they'd got all of this, and it was like a greenhouse operation. And where it all came down is nobody had talked to the water and wastewater operations, and there was nowhere near enough water in this community to sustain this economic industry. So they went somewhere else. So we have to be taking a look at how can we have sufficient water to be economically viable as a community. And then looking at a variety of pollution prevention measures. I was on a phone call this morning with the utility looking at organic compounds in their water. Not particularly dangerous, the one they were talking about, but the smell of the water and the way it looked was horrible. it was actually safe to drink. And if we look at what was happening in St. Vincent recently, most of the water was actually safe to drink. It's just nobody wanted to because it tasted awful and it didn't look good. But we have to look at how we prevent pollution. Customer satisfaction, we provide reliable, affordable service in line with defined service levels. And that's a key point there, the service level, because so many politicians will say to me, the public will not accept a rate increase. And I do not believe that. I've lived in the Caribbean for 10 years, and what people say to me is, I am willing to pay more. This is, I'm not talking people at the lowest socioeconomic levels who have no money, but I'm talking about people who have work and do have some money. But they say, what I want, if you're going to put my rate up, I want water. I want defined service levels. So I always push back about this, the public not accepting it, because that's not what I found. And it's in these surveys that I've done, I don't find it. It's about service level. And in customer satisfaction, you solicit and get customer feedback. Don't expect them just, if all you do is wait for people to complain, that's not great feedback. It's not a balanced picture. So you want to have town hall meetings. You want to be having a number of things that we would talk about in the courses. I remember working with WASCO on the Dennery plant and going up and doing some town hall meetings, and WASCO got shouted at because people hadn't had water. But by the time we finished, at least we had been able to communicate that the water's coming, this is what the plant's going to do. We had done some surveys with the people who had got the water on the first stage of the Dennery plant opening, and were able to show them that the people who were now receiving water, which they were going to get shortly, were very, very happy. So this is about effectiveness and efficiency. So we look for performance improvements in its operations at all times. And I know in Barbados and in Antigua, we've gone in and done operational assessments. And that's, so what we're looking for when we go in there and we make recommendations, it's about the operational optimization. So you commit to working towards the best uses of the resources. So how do we make the best use? Are we using the right tools? How do we make the best resources of our human capacity as well? And maintain awareness of new information and operational technology developments. And this is where going to webinars that are put on, attending the conferences, looking at new technology is really important. One of the things that is difficult sometimes in the Caribbean is finding out what is the best technology for your utility, because sometimes it's the last salesman that came in with a really good story and you need something, and the last man in with a good story gets the, often can get the business, or what's worse, it goes to a tender and it's only on low bid. That is a disaster for operational optimization. So you have to, it can be low bid as long as all the other things are on an equal playing field, but you have to do the work to determine what it is that you need and then make sure that that's what you're getting. And then water resource adequacy. And this is a big one. It's a lot bigger in the Caribbean than it is in Canada, where we are a fairly water-rich country. If I look at Curacao, Antigua and Barbados last year, there was not sufficient water. We were in droughts, and this is becoming more and more common. So working with the water resource agencies to see that we are protecting the water we have by non-water revenue, leak protection, leak repair, and also by conservation efforts. Looking at demand-side management principles to reduce water system use by its customers and conserve its sources. And don't get me going on that, because I have a lot of ideas as to how we don't need to be investing in lots of new water treatment plants. We just need to be doing things right. And there's many ways that we can be doing that. So also managing operations provide for long-term aquifer and surface water sustainability. So looking at all of these things, I often say in most countries, we don't have a water shortage crisis. We have a water storage crisis, not a water crisis. So we just don't have the capacity to store the water, and we're looking in many areas now at our stormwater drainage, and actually putting that into rates and tariffs so we can capture that water, not just having it flowing out to the ocean. And last one, stakeholder understanding and support. Well, I've talked a lot about that, so I don't need to go in, but really looking at who your stakeholders are, because they're myriad. They're not just the general public. We have to look at the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, the other regulatory bodies that are there. Commits to open communication on proposed service levels, rates and budgets, and risk management decisions. I know when we were working with Dominica after the hurricane, and we did a rate and tariff module of the EUM program, and we also did a financial viability. And part of that is how you're going to communicate, not just when you're going to have a rate increase, but throughout. And I know that Bernadette Enough has done a great job in changing his communication plan and communicating on an ongoing basis. And that will make things a lot easier, I think, going forward, I hope. And employee leadership and development. The utility commits to recruiting and training its workforce. I was in one country in the Caribbean, and I stopped to talk to some guys on the road that were doing some work on the wastewater system. There was one of the crews that were out there, and I talked to an older guy. He was probably in his early 50s, and I said, "How much training have you had?" And he just smiled and he looked at me. He said, "I work here for 29 years. He said, "One day." That is not how we get an efficient workforce. So we need to look at training, not just of our employees, but also to train our management to be able to cope with today's demands of running a business and running a large workforce. And the one that I want to focus on here is constantly seeks input from staff. Sometimes managers think that if they tell people something, it takes power away from them. They can't let people know what's going on. I can't get input for them. I will look weak. It's absolutely the opposite. The best run utilities, as in any business, are the ones that you're getting input from your staff and inputs from your customers as well. And you focus on building a team environment where everybody is working. If any of you were listening to Carl Yates when he talked a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how he's got his water leakage index down to, I think it was 1.5%. That's not percentage, that's water leakage. I think it's about 10% on percentage, but we don't talk in percentages anymore. And what he talked about is it was the staff who did this. He was the leader who set it in motion, but it was the staff that got behind this, and he focused on building a team environment so the whole team was concentrated, and they brought that water leakage down, 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 down. And Carl is a great, great manager and well recognized in Canada for that. And the infrastructure stability, I think we already talked about that one, sorry. So those are the 10 attributes and the keys to management success. We've got to use these keys to support a climate a utility works towards achieving the outcomes from the 10 attributes of EUM. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. I will beg, borrow, and steal to make something successful. So AWWA and WEF, they have put a lot of money and countless hours into developing these 10 attributes and the competencies. Why would we go and say, well, what do we need to do to run our utility well? I am a huge believer in all my business life, in checklists and just checking off and making sure that I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do. And that is what EUM gives you. So we want to look at leadership, strategic business planning, organizational approaches, measurement, and continual improvement management framework. And I'm going to finish around the Effective Utilities Certificate Program. So my ex-partner was a vice president of AWWA, and he brought me over 10 years ago, the primer that you're holding in your hand or on your computer right now, the EUM primer. And he asked me to look at it and he said, you know, what do you think of this? And I said to him, when I read it, it is a fantastic document. It really is a good document. But what are people going to do with it? You can do the self-assessment test, but what are you going to do with it? After that, it's going to sit on a shelf. And as I said, we were the largest training company in Canada, and we were doing all this technical training with water operators. So I had this bright idea of taking this and putting it into a certificate program. So I sat down with some of the most senior managers in Canada and said, if the job could talk, what would it say? What are the things that in operational effectiveness, in financial viability, that day to day, you running a fantastic utility that you do? And they gave us that, and together we built this certificate program. It's mandated, operator training, as I say, is mandated, but there's nothing that mandates management training. And so we developed this program. There's 9 training programs, 9 workshops, each of them are 2 days, and they cover all the 10 attributes. And in the end of the 10 attributes, there is a certificate that is granted that says you are certified in effective utility, or you have a certificate in effective utility management. We've done this, as I say, in WASCO, they had a couple of modules they went through. I think WASCO, when John Joseph was there, went through about 4 or 5 of the modules, and it was very, very well received. It's the first program of its kind in the world. One of my clients in Canada, who runs well over 200 utilities, no, it's actually with WASCO, sorry, I may have that quote there, no. The HR manager at WASCO said that after they started this program, there was a lineup after the first workshop of people wanting to come in and do the next one. So it's very practical. It's I know what I was going to say, it's the only one of its kind that's customized to the water and wastewater industry. My client in Ontario that runs all these utilities, they'd hired a university to give them training, and the people hated it. It had nothing to do with our industry. This is all developed not just for the industry, but for your individual program. So we're hoping that with the help of CAWASA, we're going to be able to bring these programs to you and offer them so that you can develop not just your operators in training, but also the management of the utilities. So this is actually the program not from Operators Without Borders, which is what you usually see me with, but from my own company, World Water and Wastewater Solutions. And I'd be happy, I know we're getting right at the end of the time and we didn't get to the exercise, but you've got the primer. It's a self-assessment exercise that you can do. And please, any questions before we sign off for the day? I know it's getting late. As Ignatius said, there's so much to talk about in this.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
With COVID happening and most water utilities across the world not disconnecting service due to lack of payment because water is essential in keeping safe and healthy, what adaptations would you see this management EUM helping with this?
Okay, one of the things that I believe very strongly in, and this is coming from my rate and tariff background, is that you have to build in programs for the people who are disadvantaged. And it shouldn't be just free water, because if you just give free water, they'll give it to all their neighbors and they'll, and people will be siphoning it off. But it's more like there's other ways that you can do it. And that in a time of crisis where many people are over, the utilities should be working with their governments to come up with subsidization programs. Now, I know the governments don't have a lot of money either, but around the world, it's everywhere that people are not disconnecting the water utilities. But it's a question of, making sure that the people who can pay are still paying. And I don't believe in just this universal, everybody gets their payments and their debts wiped out. You'll never have a sustainable utility if you do that. So it comes into your operational optimization and financial viability plan. And those are things that we work on in the courses. Don't know if that helps you, but it's a hard time for everybody. But it has to be a government-led issue where the government, the central government, is supporting the utility.
Okay, thanks so much.
Welcome, Nicole. Any other questions, or everybody wants their dinner? Yeah, you can certainly do the exercise and send it to me, but it's just a self one. Or maybe there's another time we can come back and talk more about this and do the exercise, Ignatius.
Yeah, well, I see that Ezekiel is suggesting he's asking whether they can do the exercise and give them to their managers to show them where we think they are and where they are.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is when we do the EUM certificate program, we start with this exercise. And it's a great idea, Ezekiel, because sometimes we see something in one way, but the managers, sometimes the senior managers are a bit in their ivory towers. You know, with the disaster SOPs that Ignatius is working with us on, we've said we don't want necessarily the general manager to be part of the workshop. We want people who are on the ground and know the systems really well. So we often have different viewpoints. Any other questions? And we will work with Ignatius. We're trying to get some funding so that we can actually run these courses. But what I will say is, I don't like running courses that's one person from one utility and one person for another on this. What we try and do is work with a whole utility. It's what we did with Wasco, with Dominica, and what we do in Canada with this training. We go into a utility, and rather than having to send a bunch of people away, we come to you, we work with your systems, and we train you an entire team. So you bring in your financial people, you bring in your HR people, you bring in all your water managers, supervisors, managers, foremen even, so that we are all working on the same. That is how change happens, not by just training one person in a utility that goes back and nothing changes. We want to see change happen.
Yeah, we have a question. Kingsley Alexander of CAWASA has his hand raised. Go ahead, Kingsley.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm particularly interested in getting some more information as regards the certificate program.
Okay.
Yeah, and how soon CAWASA will be able to access and roll out this.
Yeah, no, CAWASA, that's Grenada, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. Christopher Husbands is very familiar with the program, and we've been trying to get him on this program for quite a long time. So I will send some information through. I'll send some information to all of you on it through Ignatius.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Very welcome.
Okay, do you have any other questions? If not, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and participating, and especially to thank Valerie for filling in at the very last minute to save the day. So thank you very much.
3 people he wanted couldn't do it, so.
And next week we're going to have another person from Operators Without Borders, aren't we?
Yes.
I think that's another Carl, is it? I forgot that.
Yes, another Carl Bonnymead, and he is a senior manager with Hatch, and I'm sure many of you will know Hatch, but he's been on a team that I've been on, and he's been leading the team on putting together this this document for the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association, what we call the other CWWA.
Yeah, so we will be keeping you posted on this, and please invite your colleagues to participate, because we get some very good resource people, and we want to see that you're making use of the programs that we offer. Although I know some of you can't always make it at that time, but we have the benefit as well of having it recorded. So, but also encourage them to join us. Thank you very much.
Well, one thing I'll say, Ignatius, the last thing is that I see many people who turn up all the times. they are the people who are probably, they're keen enough and they're learning and they're expanding their horizons. They're probably going to be running the utility at some point in time. And then they'll make sure all of the people come to these seminars because they'll be in charge.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good evening and enjoy the rest of your day, Valerie. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Ignatius at CAWASA signing off on our Wednesday webinar. Bye, everyone. Good evening.